Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. It is TutorMed, where everything medicine is simplified. My name hasn't changed. My name is Dr. Kofi, and I want to begin this video by thanking my viewers for the support so far since TutorMed was started. In today's video, we will have our first discussion in physiology, and the topic is the overview of the cardiovascular physiology. If you find this useful, kindly consider liking and sharing this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done that yet. And do not forget to turn on your notification bell so you get notifications when simplified videos like these are released. Alright friends, grab your notepads and let's get started. And so friends, the objectives of today's discussion are that we will be able to mention the basic components of the cardiovascular system, and we should be able to understand the primary function of the cardiovascular system, although there are other functions, but we should be able to understand the primary function of the cardiovascular system. Then at the end of this discussion, we should be able to understand the organization of the cardiovascular system. We will look at the basic structure of the heart, and we will see how blood circulates around the body and the various circulations, basically. Then we will understand the basic structure of the various types of the blood vessels, the basic structure of the artery, for example, the veins, and then the capillaries. Then our last objective will be to understand the basic blood physiology. Here we will briefly look at the various components of blood and then their functions. Now, this image I got online gives us a big picture of how the cardiovascular system in our body looks like. The cardiovascular system is made up of a pump called the heart, and then blood vessels, which contains blood. The pump drives blood through these vessels to various parts of the body. Then there are three main groups of blood vessels, namely the artery, the veins, and the capillaries. The cardiovascular system's primary or core function is to transport materials in the blood around the body for exchange of substances. For example, the cardiovascular system will transport oxygen-poor blood, what we call deoxygenated blood, to the lungs, and when the blood gets to the lungs, there is one type of blood vessel there, the capillaries, which allows for exchange of substances, and the substances which are exchanged here mainly are gases. And so oxygen from the alveoli of the lung will enter the blood, and then carbon dioxide in the blood which has been transported there will move into the alveoli of the lungs to be exhaled. And so basically the cardiovascular system will transport materials to various destinations, and then those destinations would engage in exchange of substances, and the exchange of substances in the lungs is actually exchange of gases. And so on this slide, let's look at the basic structure of the heart. This is the heart. It has a right side or half, and then a left side or the left half, and then these halves are separated by a septum. Each half has an upper chamber and a lower chamber, and so giving a total of 4 chambers. The upper chambers are called the atria, singular atrium. And so we have the right atrium and then the left atrium. The lower chambers are the ventricles, and so we have the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Now, as you will see soon, the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, which is only a short distance away from it. But the left ventricle pumps blood to destinations which are very far away from it. Hence, its wall has to be robust for this task, and so this explains why the left ventricular muscle is thicker and more robust than the right ventricular muscle. Now, the blood from the right ventricle reaches the lungs through this vessel called the pulmonary trunk, which divides into the right and left pulmonary arteries to serve the right and left lungs respectively. Then the left ventricle pumps blood through the aorta I have labeled as A to supply the rest of the body. Now within the heart and the outflow vessels, by outflow vessels I mean the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, within the heart and these outflow vessels are structures called valves, which functions to keep blood moving in one direction. And so on the right, we have the tricuspid valve. It is so called because it has 3 leaflets or 3 cusps, and also because it is situated between the right atrium and the right ventricle. It is also called the right atrioventricular valve. Then on the left, we have the bicuspid valve, and you can guess why, right? Because it has 2 leaflets or 2 cusps, to a bicuspid valve. Its other name will be the left atrioventricular valve because it is situated between the left atrium and the left ventricle. A third name for this valve, which is used more in clinical practice, is the mitral valve. The valve in the pulmonic trunk or the pulmonary trunk is called the pulmonic valve, and the valve in the aorta is the aortic valve. Now the right atrium receives blood or deoxygenated blood from 3 places. They include the superior vena cava, a very great vein which brings deoxygenated blood from structures above the diaphragm. And so this includes the head and neck structures and then the upper limb. The inferior vena cava, also a great vein, brings deoxygenated blood from structures below the diaphragm, so the lower part of the body or below the heart, like the lower limbs, the liver, the intestines, etc. The third contributor, which is probably not known to many of us, is the coronary sinus. The coronary sinus is a great vein which brings deoxygenated blood from the heart tissue itself. And so we have the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and then the coronary sinus. Then the left atrium receives blood from the lungs through the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are actually 4, which drains into the left atrium. Remember that blood coming from the lungs is oxygenated, making the blood in the left side of the heart oxygenated blood, while on the right it is deoxygenated. And so, to summarize the basic organization of the cardiovascular system, deoxygenated blood from the systemic tissues like the head, the neck, the lower parts of the body, other parts of the body, enters the right atrium. From there, the tricuspid valve opens and then the blood enters the right ventricle. Then the right ventricle pumps the blood through the pulmonary trunk into the lungs. Of course, for this blood to escape, the pulmonic valve has to open. The blood gets to the lungs, where there is exchange of CO2 for oxygen. And then this new oxygenated blood enters the left atrium through the 4 pulmonary veins. From the left atrium, the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve opens and the oxygenated blood enters the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps this blood through the aorta. Of course, the aortic valve has to open. Then this blood moves through the aorta, which supplies the various body tissues, where oxygen in that blood is used, and so it becomes deoxygenated again. Then the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus will bring this deoxygenated blood into the right atrium again, and the whole cycle starts or repeats itself. And so, still on the heart, this is a picture I got online to show the various layers of the heart. The heart is made up of 3 layers, and then with some structures surrounding it. And so let's look at those 3 layers. The innermost layer is known as the endocardium, as labeled. The middle layer is known as the myocardium, and that is the muscle mass of the heart. Then the outermost layer of the heart is called the epicardium. And then here we have the parietal pericardium. The pericardium is the membrane that surrounds the heart. The blue, as labeled, is the pericardium. The epicardium, which is in yellow, is sometimes known as the visceral pericardium. Now, between the visceral pericardium, which is the yellow layer, and then the parietal pericardium, which is the blue layer, there is a space which contains a small amount of serous fluid called the pericardial fluid. This fluid helps the heart to relax and contract around its surrounding structures with minimal friction. And so the space is known as the pericardial space. Then, external to the parietal pericardium is the fibrous pericardium. And so the heart is actually made up of 3 layers: the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium. And then between the epicardium, which is also known as the visceral pericardium, and then the parietal pericardium, is the pericardial space, which contains pericardial fluid. And then we have the fibrous pericardium. And so this is the organization of the heart. We have said that the heart is a pump. The various chambers would pump blood in that sequential manner. And so which system within the heart is responsible for this ability? That is the conduction system in the heart. And so this diagram will show us the conduction system in the heart. The green you see in this diagram represents the conduction pathway. Now, these are cells which generate impulses automatically, and then the impulses they generate, when they move through the chambers of the heart, they enable them to pump. So the first we are going to label here is the sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node is known as the pacemaker of the heart, in that it determines how fast and then what the rhythm of the heartbeat should be. From there, we move to the atrioventricular node, or the AV node. Before we see something about the AV node, kindly note that the sinoatrial node has about 3 connections to the AV node, and then these connections are called the internodal fibers. And as you can clearly see, the SA node also has a connection to the left atrium through this bundle called Bachmann's bundle. Now, I should mention that the SA node is situated in the right atrium, the superior part, close to the entry of the superior vena cava. Now, the AV node functions to delay impulses, so that just when the atria are contracting, the ventricles will not be contracting at the same time, or else blood will not move in the sequence like we discussed earlier. Then after the AV node has delayed the impulses and then the atria have sufficiently contracted, it relays the impulses to the ventricles through this bundle called bundle of His. The bundle of His would divide into 2. One is the left bundle branch, which would send the impulses to the left ventricle, and the other is the right bundle branch, which will send the impulses to the right ventricle. Now, although not shown here, the left bundle branch of the bundle of hairs also divides into an anterior fascicle and a posterior fascicle, and ultimately the left bundle branch and then the right bundle branch will end in short fibers called Purkinje fibers, which are the direct delivers or the direct delivery men of the impulses to the ventricular wall. And so please take note of this conduction system: the SA node, the AV node, the bundle of hairs, the left bundle branch, the right bundle branch, and then the Purkinje fibers. And so now to the blood vessels. Remember, we mentioned 3 of them. We said we had the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. And so let's begin with the arteries. Mistakenly or erroneously, many people think arteries are blood vessels which contain oxygenated blood. But as you know, there is one artery, the pulmonary artery, which contains deoxygenated blood, and so this definition is not valid. And so an artery or arteries are blood vessels which carry blood away from the heart to the tissues of the body. So regardless of the kind of blood they carry, once you are a blood vessel which carries blood away from the heart, you are an artery. So for example, the aorta and the subclavian artery, etc. Then we come to veins. And so erroneously, students used to think that veins are blood vessels which carry deoxygenated blood. But we know that one vein, the pulmonary vein, carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium. And so the correct definition of a vein is: veins are blood vessels which carry blood from the tissues to the heart. And so if you are any blood vessel which carries blood into the heart, you are a vein. And then we look at capillaries. So capillaries, as we will see later, are a one-cell thick layer blood vessel which permits exchange of materials between the blood and the body tissues. And so this picture I got online illustrates the organization or the arrangement between the artery, capillary, and the vein. And so the artery would bring blood from the heart, usually oxygenated blood from the heart, into the tissues. Then it will get into the capillaries, where there will be exchange of materials between the tissue and then the blood, mostly oxygen and then fuel like glucose. Then after the tissues have used up the contents of the blood in the capillary system, they would give their waste products like carbon dioxide, and then the veins will drain that blood, and the blood will be sent back to the heart. The heart will pump that blood to the lungs for reoxygenation, and then the cycle continues. And so basically capillaries permit exchange of materials between the blood vessels and then the body tissues. Now we have seen what arteries, veins, and capillaries are. Let's take a moment to review their basic structures, beginning with the artery. And so this is a picture of an artery, and this is the lumen of the artery. The lumen is a space through which the blood flows. And so, like the heart, blood vessels also have 3 layers. The innermost layer is called the tunica intima. Then the outermost layer, the middle layer, is called the tunica media. The outermost layer is known as the tunica adventitia. And so that is for the arteries. Then this is a picture of a vein. Again, it also has 3 layers, and then that is the lumen, the space through which blood flows. And so the vein also has got a tunica intima, which is the innermost layer, a middle layer, the tunica media, and then an outermost layer, the tunica adventitia. Notice the difference between the tunica media, the difference in the tunica media of the artery and then the vein. You realize that the tunica media of the arteries are more robust than the tunica media of the veins. This is because the arteries carry blood directly from the heart, and so they need an adaptation which would make them withstand the forceful contraction of the blood pressure, or the pressure with which the heart is pumping the blood, and so they need that robust tunica media. Then let's look at the capillary. So this is a picture of the capillary, and then as mentioned, it is a one cell thick layer because we need that thinness to be able to facilitate the diffusion of substances across the arterial or the capillary membrane into the tissue space. And so remember that the capillary functions as a blood vessel for exchange of materials. If it has the same layers that the artery has, it would not be able to perform its exchange function. And so this explains why the capillary has got one layer of endothelium. And so friends, do not forget to like and share this video, and kindly subscribe to our channel if you have not done that yet. Now on this slide, let's look at some types of arteries. I mentioned that arteries generally are blood vessels which carry blood away from the heart. But there are some types of arteries I want us to pay attention to. And so this is a diagram again I got from online, which illustrates the three major types of arteries. The first is an elastic artery. Now really the difference among the three types of arteries lies in the composition of their tunica media. So the tunica media is made up of smooth muscle cells and then elastin fibers. And so whether or not you would be one of the three depends on the various compositions, whether the elastic fibers are more than the smooth muscles or not. And so for the elastic artery, the elastic fibers are more than the smooth muscles, and so they are called elastic arteries. Examples include the aorta and its major branches like the subclavian artery, the carotid arteries, and the like. Then again, the pulmonary artery is an example of an elastic artery. And so like I said, it is because the elastic fibers are relatively higher in number compared to the smooth muscles in these types of arteries. Then the next group is the muscular artery. And so in the muscular arteries, the muscles or the smooth muscles are more than the elastic fibers. And then they are the branches or the sub-branches of the major branches of the aorta. And so they include arteries like the radial artery, the femoral artery. You know, the radial artery is a branch of the brachial artery, which is a continuation of the subclavian artery. And so femoral artery is also a branch of the iliac arteries, which are actually branches of the abdominal aorta. And so these arteries are called muscular arteries. Why? Because the muscle composition is more than the elastic fibers. Then we have the last group called resistance arteries. These are actually arterioles, and in this group, the tunica media is almost made up of smooth muscles alone, and so they are able to offer resistance to blood flow. So the point I want to make here is that arteries generally carry blood away from the heart, but we have three types of arteries. We have the elastic arteries, the muscular artery, and then the resistance artery. The resistance arteries are actually arterioles. Alright friends, and so we have spoken about the organization or the arrangement of the structures of the heart. And so now let's look at the arrangement of the vascular system. And so remember that from the heart, the blood vessel which takes blood away from the heart is the artery. Then from the artery, we move to the arteriole. Then from the arteriole, we move to the blood vessel which is responsible for exchange of substances, that is the capillaries. And from the capillaries, you move to small veins called the venules. And then from the venules, you move to the vein. And so this diagram is a diagram I got online to illustrate the normal or the usual arrangement of the vascular system. And so the vessel in red is the artery, and then note the direction of the arrows. It means that the artery is bringing blood to a certain organ. Let's assume that organ is the brain. And so we have the artery, then from the artery you come to the arteriole. Then from the arteriole you come to the capillary bed where the blood, there is exchange of substances there. And then after the brain has exchanged or has undergone exchange of materials with the blood in the capillary, then the blood will join, the capillaries will join to form the venule, and then the venules will join to form the vein. Then subsequently, remember, veins are vessels that drain blood into the heart. And so the cycle will begin again. When the vein drains the blood into the heart, then the heart will send the blood to the lungs for oxygenation. Then it will be pumped through the aorta, and then the vessel coming into the brain would get its blood supply, which is the artery, the cerebral artery, then the arteriole, the capillaries, like that. And so that is how the cycle will be. Now on this slide, let's look at some two important concepts: the concept of the pulmonary circulation and then the systemic circulation. Now, the pulmonary, anytime you hear of the word pulmonary, it has to do with the lungs. And so the pulmonary circulation is responsible for sending the deoxygenated blood to the lungs to be oxygenated. And so it begins with a pump. And so the right ventricle is the pump on the right. All right. So it begins from the right ventricle, then it gets into the lungs, and then finally to the left atrium. And so the pulmonary circulation starts with the right ventricle through to the left atrium. And so let me illustrate that as a sequence. And so like I said, every circulation would want to begin with a pump. And so on the right, we have the right ventricle. Then it will pump the blood through the pulmonary artery. Then the pulmonary artery would give the blood to the lungs. Then from the lungs would give the blood to the pulmonary veins, and from the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. And so the pulmonary circulation begins with the right ventricle and ends at the left atrium. Then we talk about the systemic circulation. So the systemic circulation is responsible for supplying oxygenated blood to the rest of the body and then bringing it back to the heart. And so it means that, remember, every circulation begins with a pump. The systemic circulation will begin with a pump, and on the left ventricle is a pump. And so from the left ventricle, it goes to the body organs and then back to the right atrium. Very good. And so to illustrate this as a sequence, you have the systemic circulation beginning with the left ventricle. The left ventricle will pump the blood to the aorta. Then from the aorta, the blood will move through the various branches of the aorta. Let's take, for example, the brain. So the brain is a tissue. So from the branch of the aorta, the blood will move into the tissues. Then, after the tissues have used up the oxygen and the various substances, the blood will drain into the tissue veins, and the tissue veins will drain into the great veins, which are the inferior and the superior vena cava. Remember that the inferior vena cava will drain the blood, deoxygenated blood, from tissues below the diaphragm or below the heart, essentially. And then the superior vena cava will drain the deoxygenated blood from tissues above the diaphragm or above the heart, essentially. Then after that, all of them will drain into the right atrium. And so basically, the systemic circulation begins with the left ventricle and ends in the right atrium. Remember that the heart, as mentioned earlier, has a vein which directly drains into the right atrium. It doesn't join the superior vena cava, and we mentioned that that vein from the heart is called the coronary sinus. And so now, as part of our objectives, remember we said we'll look at the basic physiology of blood. And so the first thing I want to say is that blood is a fluid substance which is found in blood vessels. And then it is composed of a liquid part called the plasma and a solid part called the blood cells. Now, the blood cells, as you may know already, we have 3 blood cells. We have the red blood cells based on the color, we have the white blood cells, and the platelets. The red blood cells are responsible for carrying oxygen and then carbon dioxide in hemoglobin around the body. I wanted to say it carries it in the hemoglobin molecule. Then we have white blood cells which fight against diseases, and then platelets which helps in blood clotting. Then, like we said, the plasma is the liquid part of the blood. It contains plasma proteins, waste products like urea, creatinine, drugs, the metabolites of drugs. It contains electrolytes like sodium, potassium, phosphorus, chloride ions. It contains hormones. So hormones like thyroxine, insulin. It contains dissolved gases like carbon dioxide, and then it is about 70 to 80% water. So it contains water as well. And so this is the basic blood physiology I wanted to speak about. Remember, this is an overview. When we get into the real meat, we would take our time and go through each of these. As an illustration to tell the various compositions of the blood, whenever we do a venipuncture and we take blood from a patient and we put it in a bottle, we can centrifuge or spin the sample in the bottle. Now, when we centrifuge it, we will find out that the red cells will separate and they will settle at the bottom, and then the plasma would be on top. So as you can see, the plasma takes about 55% of the volume. Then you have this white buffy coat which is made up of the white blood cells and the platelets. Then we have the red cell mass sitting alone. That's also known as hematocrit or packed cell volume, and that is composed of red cells. And so this is where the lecture ends on the overview of the cardiovascular system. I trust this was helpful. Our subsequent videos would take time to explain into details the various things we've discussed today. And so please do not forget to like and share this video, and then subscribe to our channel if you have not done that yet. And so I will see you in the next video. Until then, bye.